Want a cookie? Oh, I know you just ate, so you're craving something a little sweet. Besides, one cookie isn't gonna kill you. How about half? Just a bite? Bite it. Bite it. Bite it.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. Your affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on a path to successful weight loss by quieting food noise.
Bite it!
Shh. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
911, what's the nature of your emergency?
Welcome back to the Tactical Living Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Walton, joined by Sergeant Walton. How are you?
I'm good.
We just paused for a second because I couldn't tell if you were getting ready to yawn or not.
My throat was making all these weird noises.
You know, my friend Grant died, and I feel like every day I go onto his Facebook account and I'm looking at his post and basically revisiting them again because obviously I've seen them with my heart engagement being very evident to me. But last night when I was looking at it, I started to see a lot of the things that he was bringing up from the past and a lot of these traumatic things that have happened. So I'm thinking about different terrorist incidents in the city that he worked. I'm thinking about different law enforcement officer deaths that he's had in his career. And I'm just seeing all of these posts that he's never forgetting. And he's always just reminding maybe himself, but then other people as he's posting. And it had me thinking about how a lot of officers, basically after trauma, they don't feel the same anymore. And I thought we could talk a little bit about that.
And it's really interesting because as you're explaining that, like I'm not just in the post thing of it, but like thinking in my mindset is we have these reminders, like looking at Facebook and seeing every couple of years you have 2 years ago, this is what you were doing, this is what you shared, this is what you posted. It's almost like these reminders of whatever these incidents are, whatever keeps coming up, and it's stemming that re-engagement in reference to whatever that incident is, whether positive, negative, or kind of an indifferent type of understanding with it. And I think it's good to have because it's always good to see the history of what we've reestablished or what's created us to this point of where we are today, but in also really analyzing like, well, what changed me about this incident?
Totally. And you know, I thought we could talk a little bit about how this isn't you being broken, but it's about understanding how trauma reshaped your perspective, your identity, your emotional responses, and why basically trying to return to an old version of yourself can a lot of the times create more frustration than it does healing. And you know, there's this quiet realization that many first responders reach, especially after having repeated responses to trauma. Something might have seemed to change, and it might feel like going back to who you were before does not feel possible, like at all.
Yeah, I think because it's like, it's that DNA map of our mind that comes through as, because of this incident, this is why I do things the way I do. And each of us have that differentiating opinions when it comes down to those incidents of, well, like a perfect example is a story we talked about multiple times is when I had the 5-year-old or 3-year-old little girl point the gun at me, and that's changed my approach and my dynamics on how I've done things from that point on throughout my entire career. Like, I don't let kids go off in the back room and just sit there and watch cartoons anymore. I don't be overly comfortable in those situations because if I do, there's that fear of what could happen if I were to do that. So, and I think with every incident, especially critical incidents, everything we go to, we start remapping our approaches, our ways of addressing things and dealing with things, whether it's in your personal or professional life. It creates who you are today.
So that leads in perfectly with the psychological concept that I want to talk about today. It's called post-traumatic identity shift. And it's important to understand that trauma does not just impact your memory and your emotion, but it actually totally alters how your brain prioritizes safety and meaning and connection. And so, Clint, what you're describing is exactly that.
And that's it's interesting to see that, because I don't think we, especially as law enforcement or first responders or military in general, we recognize that. And if you don't recognize it, you're just saying, well, this is just how it is. I mean, that's the number one thing that drives me insane with departments is they go, well, this is how we've always done it. Well, and then they can't give you an answer of why we're doing that. And it's doing that self-work, being able to recognize within yourself, well, it's not, this is how we've always done it. What led me to start doing things this way?
Yeah, and the example that you gave with that young girl was something that actually turned out to be an asset for you moving forward, perhaps even more so than you realize. However, for a lot of people, it can actually do the opposite and show up in very negative ways. I think that sometimes for people, it'll make you feel like you're disconnected from your old self, or it even changes in values or priorities. And a lot of times too, I see a lot of people who lose interest in the things that they once cared about. When, we see divorce, we see people no longer taking part in their hobbies, those types of things. And I also see a lot of emotional flatness or even that unguardedness all of the time. Yeah,
because we're resistant to that change. We're resistant to being able to adapt to the new that's coming in all the time. And with having that, it's never fun to always experience it, but to do the self-work and recognize any of those changes coming through, and not only identifying why things are the way they are, but being open to say, okay, it's okay to have this shift in dynamics.
I'm thinking about how there have been conversations that I've seen, maybe from you, but mostly I'm thinking if we've gone out and taken officers on fishing trips and things like that, where somebody might say something like, hey, you used to blink. And the response is, yeah, but then I became a police officer. And I think that that's a sign that a lot of people might be experiencing a post-traumatic shift, even if they're not realizing it, to where you grieve who you used to be, even if you can't explain why.
Yeah, I think with that, like, we do each go through that process throughout our lives, especially if you go, well, when I was younger, I used to go out and do this. And then as you're growing up, like, you start seeing the shifts of your mindset shifts on what you believe, what your values and integrity, or what your values are. They're going to adapt and change based off of your life experience up to that point. And we each have that, and it's having that understanding. It's okay to have that shift, but internally I used to like doing this. I mean, I can think of numerous things that we used to have a lot of fun doing this, so we should go do it. And then we go do it, and both of us are like, why are we doing this? This is stupid.
Yeah, that's a great point, because sometimes it could just be things that you naturally grew out of, and it could have nothing to do with your career. And I think too, for some people, the world might feel louder or heavier. Maybe your tolerance for noise or chaos is lower. That's totally us. For some people, though, their priorities might have changed. Something that once mattered to them doesn't matter anymore. Or you feel out of sync with other people. Connection might feel hard to be able to maintain. We see that happening all the time. And that's all the more reason why it's so important to have, even if it's just that one couple or that one person to be able to hold on to, and then to kind of build that sense of peace with.
Yeah, having that shared effort to be able to communicate with one another and be able to not only speak with one another about it, but to change together on it. Because I think over the years, I mean, I think anyone in this world entirely is, if you say, how were you in high school and what's different from now, especially after a 20-year, whatever your career is, there's going to be those changes. There's going to be that shift in your perception of what reality is for you.
So what are the tactics here? I think the most important thing is to stop forcing the old version of you. I think that healing requires integration and not reversal and trying to go back to what doesn't exist anymore. And name what trauma took place, what it taught you, like you just did. I think that's really powerful. And build your identity around your values and not necessarily your survival.
Yeah, and I think with doing that, starts making it easier to go through and move through that grieving process. If we're able to move through that, it makes it okay to really embrace that change.
I think that for some people, they feel like that change is a failure. Like, what happened? I became a cop, for example. But when you allow yourself to grow without the guilt, something really beautiful happens, because instead of you trying to hold this really tight, very small container, you're actually opening that container up. And that's when things can come in. And then you're also allowed to be able to release some of the things that just don't belong anymore. And
with saying that, and this just came to me, is I think one of the hardest parts to it is you have people telling you, like, hey, you're different now. What happened? Well, you did change, but they also did change too, to where it's having that understanding for each other that over time you're going to have the shifts in perspective. You're not always going to be the same person that you once were. And I think each of us do that. And that's where we need to show that grace and love towards one another when that happens.
I hope you've gotten some value out of today's episode. If you have, do us a favor, drop a review, subscribe down below. And as always, know that I'm sending you a long, tight hug from my home to yours.